If you pass away or you become incapacitated and you have no plan in place for that business, it could potentially be absolute chaos.
Estate planning. Just that phrase makes many people freeze. They think too complicated, too expensive, and something I'll get to later. But waiting can cost families far more than money. It could cost peace, clarity, and connection. That's why today's guest, David Haughton, Vice President of Estate Planning at Carson Group, is on a mission to change that story. As an attorney and a nationally recognized voice featured in Michael Kitces' Nerd's Eye View, Investment News, and the Journal of Financial Planning, David helps families and business owners turn complex estate and tax challenges into confident, lasting legacies. If you've ever wondered how to protect what you've built and pass on more than just wealth, this episode is for you. I'm Larry Sprung, your host for the Midland Money Mindset and founder and wealth advisor of Midland Financial. Let's dive into the show. Well, I am super excited today to have Dave Haughton, Vice President of Estate Planning at Carson Group. And welcome to the show, Dave.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm excited to do this.
Yeah, I am excited because you are one of the few people that can make estate planning super fun and engaging. So I'm excited to share that with our listeners. But before we jump into what you're doing today and in your role at Carson Group, can you share with our listeners a little bit about yourself and kind of what brought you up into that point? Maybe just like a 10,000 foot overview.
Absolutely, yeah. My background's a little bit unique. I am an attorney. I am an estate planning attorney by trade. And that's how I started out my career. I actually started out doing bankruptcy and I moved over into private practice estate planning. I did that for the better part of a decade. And then I moved over into the financial advisor space for a broker dealer at Commonwealth Financial Network, where I was a consultant for financial advisors about estate planning and really any financial planning topic. So that was really interesting to be on both sides of the fence, working directly with clients on estate planning and then working with advisors to help their clients with their estate planning. From there, I went to the tech space and I worked at wealth.com for about a year. And that was a really interesting part of my journey. I really got to see what types of tools and technologies are available to continue to help make estate planning more accessible. And just recently, I came back to the financial advising space, essentially working with advisors to help with estate planning, make it accessible at Carson. So it's been quite a journey. It's been diverse, mostly in the estate planning space, but it's been exciting.
Yeah. So, I guess it sounds like you really like working with advisors and their families because you went there, you left for a short period of time and then came back. So it seems like that's where your passion lies, I guess.
I love it. Yeah, I really do love it because, advisors are really the quarterback of the relationship and they're usually the most trusted professional that a client has, when you look across the spectrum of who a client's dealing with. So it's really a great spot, especially for estate planning, because I talk about making estate planning accessible. The numbers are so dismal as far as how many people actually have an estate plan. And I think advisors stand in such an important position to be able to help clients with their estate planning and direct them to the right resource to get it done and get it done right. So it's really been a fantastic way to go about my career to shift from working just in the law to helping financial advisors get educated, understand how this stuff works, and then help deliver it to clients.
Yeah, I agree. And, I think one of the things that's interesting about your background is that when, people are growing up or they're going to college, they think, hey, I'm going to go to law school and be a lawyer, right? Or I'm going to practice law or be a corporate attorney or in-house count, whatever that may be. I don't know that many think that there's this path that, hey, I could go from law school to advising financial advisors to advise their families on estate planning. So, how and when did that shift kind of take place for you? And where was the realization that, hey, this is a thing and this is a thing that I could really have impact and I could really enjoy?
Yeah, I think it was, when I was practicing and really working with clients, I started to kind of feel like a salesman, right? Because it was clients would come in, I'd be stacked up with consultations all day. And, I'd be delivering estate planning, helping with their estate planning, but I didn't really feel like I was doing what I was really passionate about, and that's educating. That's really getting into the nitty gritty. I'm a nerd at heart when it comes to these things, writing articles, presenting, and I didn't even know that that type of role existed until I looked into it and I saw how advanced planning departments work. And once I found that out, I kind of thought to myself, this is absolutely perfect. It lets me, educate, boil things down into understandable terms, which is something you have to do for clients. For financial advisors, they're a little bit more sophisticated, so you can get a little bit more creative and sophisticated in the way that you're communicating. So once I found out that that type of role existed, I dove in. And then once I did, I don't think I was coming back from it.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, I think it's one of those things that like you only know what you know, right? And it's not something that's talked about or shared with many people, so they don't even realize it's an option. So, I want to spend some time on estate planning because you said it. It's something that needs to be more accessible. I think even if we have access, we need people to adopt it. Because there are plenty of people that have estate planning accessible to them, but they don't end up doing it for whatever reason. So let's kind of start at the beginning with estate planning, because I think that phrase alone, the words estate planning, right off the rip, is very overwhelming for a lot of people. And they don't even understand, well, why do I have to do this? I don't have a lot of money, or I do have a lot of money, but I have beneficiaries. Can you break down a little bit why estate planning is so vitally important?
Absolutely. And it's funny that you say that even the word estate planning can be confusing or it can be intimidating. I remember I met with an intern once, and they were going to do a presentation on the Great Wealth Transfer. And I remember they wanted to get my perspective on it and understand what I do. And I talked about estate planning. I probably talked for about 5 minutes straight about all the different, 90% of assets are lost to an advisor at the first death, and how much money is going to transfer hands, and it should be done, to avoid probate, and all these different concepts I was mentioning. And once I got to the end of it, the intern said to me, well, my first question is, what is estate planning? So it's not that logical, like even from the start. And I think that's really important that we all understand that these are really morbid and complex topics that we really need to break down into their most simple terms to start. And, the way I try to get people to understand how important estate planning is one way is if you don't have a plan, so you haven't created your own will, your own power of attorney, that's okay because everyone has a plan because the state legislator made it for you. State legislature and politicians made it for you. And do you want that? And most people are not super thrilled with the idea of that. They want to have their own plan. And I think a lot of people don't realize that these things are inevitable. Death is absolutely inevitable. And a lot of people, I don't know the statistics, but probably most people become incapacitated before they pass away for at least some period of time. If you don't have your wishes laid out in a legally valid way, then what's going to happen is a judge is going to decide for you. There will be some process that will happen that will be expensive, time-consuming, and will be very stressful for your loved ones that will get you to the point that they can plan for you, unless you had just planned for yourself up front. If you had planned for yourself up front, then it can be smooth for everyone. So in many ways, estate planning can be a very selfless act, right? Because I call it like packing your parachute. You have no idea if the estate plan is going to work until it's too late anyways. So it is a very selfless act. But anyone who's had a parent die or whatever, a loved one go through difficult circumstances that required a power of attorney to be used or a court involvement or probate, they understand how this can affect someone's legacy if you don't plan. It's really the thing that's in the forefront of someone's mind, thinking about when that person passed away, they didn't plan, and it made life very difficult for everyone around them in an already very difficult time. So I think that's a really important aspect to try to get to the emotional reason for why people need to plan, not just the legal reasons.
Yeah. And I think what you're saying is, if I'm understanding this correctly, two things. One is it doesn't really matter how much money you have. There's an estate plan that either you have or the state legislature has for you, right?
Right.
And estate planning can be as easy as making sure that you have beneficiaries on everything, all the way down to very complex trusts, right?
Right, absolutely. Yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, across the entire net worth spectrum and across the whole age spectrum, everyone needs estate planning. People think they may think I'm too young, right? But think about the college age child who's going off to college, who knows what they're going to get into, with partying, whatever the case is. There's still some risk there that something could happen. If they become incapacitated, they've lived their whole life as a dependent on the tax. They might still be a dependent on, for tax reasons, on health insurance. They might still live with a parent, but they're an adult when it comes to legally. And so if something were to happen to them, their parent that they've relied on for so long can't even make decisions on their behalf. And
Yeah.
so, it doesn't matter how old you are. It doesn't matter how much money you are. You need some form of estate planning.
Yeah. So what do you think, if you could kind of break it down to maybe the top 2 or 3 things that people really need to know about the importance of estate planning, what would those 2 or 3 things be?
I think number one is that everyone needs an estate plan, as we just discussed. I think that it's a very easy thing to get done, but a very difficult thing to get yourself motivated to do. And so I think people need to realize that they may not think it's urgent and they're going to kick the can down the road, but anything can happen at any moment. And we all know this. Everyone would agree with this. If you talk to someone on the street and you ask them, is it important to have a will? They would say yes. And then you would ask them, do you have a will? They would probably say no, right? So, but everyone knows it's important. It's just you need to get to motivate them to understand anything can happen at any time. So you need to really look at getting a plan in place now. It is urgent. Even though it is literally one of the last things you need to do in your life, you don't know when that's going to be necessary. So
Right.
it is urgent. I think that's the first thing that everyone needs to realize. Every single person who's an adult, it's urgent that you get something in place. The other thing that's really important is that people realize it needs to be reviewed and updated pretty regularly, because people will get their estate plan done and they'll breathe a big sigh of relief and say, I finally got that done, put it in a desk drawer and forget about it. 10 years goes by. Who knows what may have changed? Your family dynamics may have changed. Certainly your net worth has probably changed your needs. Your selections of fiduciaries may have changed. You may have selected a sibling who you had a falling out with, or your children have grown up to the point that now you want them to be the fiduciaries. So really important to regularly look at estate planning documents. And then the other thing I just mentioned is the law changes quite often. Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, the Secure Act, the Big Beautiful Bill. These are things that affected estate planning in big ways, as well as technology, right? There's digital assets now. So everyone has a Facebook account. They have an iPhone potentially with tons of videos and pictures on it that are really important. How is someone going to access that? 20 years ago, that wasn't put in estate plans because nobody even considered it. So these are all really critical things to think about, that you need to make sure that not only are you getting a plan in place, but you're staying on top of it, understanding what it says and updating it as needed.
Yeah, great points. And I'll share personally, right? I took a little bit of a different stance. I've done my estate plan. I think the first time my wife and I did our first estate plan was right when we got married. And we've probably updated it 2 or 3 times over that period of time. And we just celebrated 25 years. So that just gives you an idea of how often you should be looking at it. And we took a different view. Like, aside from the view of, hey, I don't want to think about these things, it was, hey, I want to make sure that everybody's taken care of and things are handled in the appropriate manner. So it gave us a little bit of a sigh of relief by having these things in place. And then clearly over 25 years, looking at that 2 or 3 times over that period of time, we've adjusted and updated it. So I think that, you hit the nail on the head. First is to make sure that you have that plan and approach it from a standpoint of, it's going to bring joy and ease of mind to you. And then make sure that you're updating it. You definitely don't want to throw it in the drawer with everything, because our first estate plan, I can tell you, did not include digital assets, but our most recent one did.
Right.
So hit the nail on the head. Imagine a relationship where financial conversations don't feel stressful, but actually bring you joy. We've designed a guide to help you have positive, meaningful money conversations with your partner. This isn't just another budgeting tool, it's a roadmap for building trust and connection. So if you're ready to start a joyful money journey with your partner, go to Midland.us/couplesjoy and download your free guide. Transform your financial future together, starting today. Many of our audience, or many of our listeners, and really many of those we serve at Midland are business owners. And for many small business owners, their largest asset could be, and in many times is, the company they've built. What advice do you have for them as to why estate planning and succession planning also, in their case, are so critical?
Yeah, I think it could be one of the most important areas when it comes to estate planning, because when it comes to a business, which is usually a pretty illiquid asset, it's also an emotional asset that you'd like to keep going. There's so many complexities involved that you need to plan for, that if you pass away or you become incapacitated and you have no plan in place for that business, it could potentially be absolute chaos. If you have multiple children, some of them are involved in the business, others are not involved in the business. Some of them want to sell, some of them don't want to sell. How's that going to shake out? It's just going to be conflict. That's why it's so important that if you are planning your succession, whether it be, through insurance or through trust provisions, whatever the case is, that you're being really detailed to make sure that you think of all the different ways that things could go haywire. For example, if someone passes away, what's the business valued at? How are you going to value that? Do you have a process? Could it be that, there's an appraiser that you've already identified that's going to do it? Could it be that each party potentially that is going to inherit the asset gets their own appraisal, and you match them up in a certain way? So, valuation is really critical. And then also identifying who is going to succeed, be in the succession plan for the business to actually manage the business. Because if you have multiple children or multiple people involved and you have not identified that, I've seen it in my extended family. I think we've all seen it in the past, that it can lead to real bad blood, and it can ultimately fail the business, unfortunately.
Yeah, I think, you hit the nail on the head. And definitely, I look at estate planning as the way to create or prevent as many conflicts as possible in the long run. And, maybe you can't think about every iteration, but you got to think about at least the vast majority of them, and then the ones that will potentially cause the most friction. And businesses are certainly one of those. Now, I think you'd agree, not all assets are necessarily created equal, right? And, why do you think that, why should people think about the kind of assets they have and how they leave those to their loved ones? Like, for example, a business probably needs to be thought about a lot differently than digital assets, like you mentioned, or an IRA, things like that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think people in general, when it comes to estate planning, they have this, what I call, one big pot mindset, that the estate is just one big pot and we're going to divide it up three ways. So just throw it all in there, and then if something happens, we'll just divide it up. And it doesn't really work that way, both in terms of liquidity and as far as the tax attributes of the underlying assets that are being left. And that's why I'm a big proponent of what I would call an asset by asset approach to estate planning. And, one good example for how to think about this is, let's say that a client has two children. One lives in Florida, which is a tax, no income tax. And let's say they have a low income position. They volunteer a lot, but, they're not making a ton of money. And then the other child, let's say, lives in California, and they're a physician, and they have a high income. Now, let's say that the estate is made up of heavily of IRAs, and then there's a lot of non-qualified funds. Well, someone who's thinking about that from an asset by asset approach would understand that if you leave the retirement account that has a lot of tax deferred money in it to that beneficiary in California who already has high income, that's going to get eaten up by taxes much faster than if you left it to the child in Florida. And so that doesn't mean that you need to be inequitable when you're leaving the money. It just means that you need to analyze things and be intentional, because there may be a way that at the end of the day, more wealth is ultimately transferred with less dissipation due to taxes, because you figured out a calculation where it was more appropriate to leave more of the IRA to the child in Florida, and an asset that could get a step up in basis to the child in California, and then find some way to obviously equalize it, so that one isn't actually getting more money than the other. But it's a way that you can think about things if you're thinking about these different assets and how you're going to approach it. And the other thing you mentioned is business, vacation homes. These types of things really need to be planned for, to really think about, how am I going to transfer this and how are we going to allocate it? Because if you leave a vacation home to 3 children and just say divide it 3 ways, what does that mean? Are all 3 of them going to own it together? How's that going to work out? Who's going to pay expenses? How are they going to decide on that? What if one wants to sell and the other 2 don't want to sell? What if you're leaving one? What if one of the children wants the property, but there's not enough money left in the estate to compensate the other 2 children? How are you going to deal with that? Could there potentially be a loan from one child to the other? So there's so many ways you can get creative. Obviously, you don't want to get too complex, because now you're getting into the point where there's confusion and cost and everything. But it's just important to be thinking of it at that level, asset by asset, not just as one big pot.
Yeah, I think that's great. And we actually had that same scenario. We had a family that 3 brothers ended up inheriting the family vacation home. So we had them create, through an attorney, had them create an agreement that if somebody wanted to sell, this was going to be the function for them to get out of it versus, coming in. But they all wanted to own it initially, which is great. But, you don't know that that's going to be 5 years down the road. People have different needs. Maybe if they're younger, kids are going to college, they need, money, whatever. So I think that's a great way to look at it and approach it, is that asset by asset approach. A few months ago, you shared how the NVIDIA CEO is estimated to be on pace to save $8 billion in estate taxes. And, I know that a lot of people listening to our show aren't in necessarily that, dollar bracket where they could save $8 billion. But I always find that there are lessons to be learned from people like this, where they're planning, saving a tremendous amount in estate taxes. So, what strategies can, regular people or business owners, regular like our clients, take away from what looks like something that's only for billionaires?
What's interesting about that whole story when it came out is it's more about the amount he saved than the sophistication of really how he planned and what happened there, because it seemed like the narrative was some kind of tax dodge, right? When in actuality, he actually took an approach to estate planning that a lot of people could take. I mean, right now the estate tax exemption is very high. It's at 13.99 million. It's going to be 15 million next year. So you can leave up to that amount without tax. But basically what he did, if you break it down to its simplest terms, he put assets into trust, into an irrevocable trust outside of his estate, while the NVIDIA stock was at a lower value. And since it was outside of his estate, it all grew exponentially outside of the estate through these irrevocable trusts. And this is something that anyone could do. Now, would most people do it if they don't have an estate tax concern? No. And the reason you wouldn't do it is because you're going to give up control. And also the other thing is you're going to lose a step up in basis on those assets that you put into the trust. So for a typical person who has absolutely no estate tax concern, they're probably not going to do those same types of strategies. However, you have to realize that the estate tax exemption is a moving target. So there is a risk, if not a likelihood, that could come tumbling down if there's a new administration years down the line, where we've seen the estate tax exemption be as low as $1 million, 20 years ago. And so, there's still a case to be made for using these types of approaches, whether it be, I believe he used grantor retained annuity trust, GRATs, to get appreciation of assets out of the estates, and then also intentionally defective grantor trust. So you can gift assets while they're at a lower value now to get them out of the estate. And that means that you'll use your gift tax exemption now, but they won't be a part of your estate later on. So if they grow exponentially, hopefully by $8 billion, that'll all be outside of your estate and it won't be subject to that 40% estate tax. So he essentially saved dollar for dollar 40% on that $8 billion, which is pretty incredible. And it was through really, I don't want to say simplistic, but conventional means that he did that. So people could be in a state like I am in Massachusetts. The estate tax exemption is at $2 million. So there is definitely a use case in certain circumstances to use these types of tools. People who maybe their estate is at 10 million or 15 million, they may not have an estate tax issue now, but if they can foresee that their estate is going to continue to grow and the estate tax exemption could come down, there's also a use case for that. So I think the strategies and tools he were using, even though the numbers are big, if you break it down, it was pretty conventional.
Yeah. I mean, what I'm hearing is these are tools and strategies that are available to everyone, right? It's not something that's only available to somebody who's looking to save $8 billion. And I think the importance that we're trying to impress upon people is put together and have a review for your estate plan and see if some of these strategies and tools make sense for you, because you might be able to save, on a percentage basis, the same percentage. It might be a lot lower dollar amount, but on a percentage basis, you might be able to do something similar. So I think there's a lot of merit there. So I'm gonna pivot for a minute here, because if anyone has seen your social posts, they would automatically know that you have a tendency to lead with humor. And I think that's a great way to approach this topic that is sometimes a little bit dry and maybe, like you said, morbid. But, how has you leading with humor, how has that helped you connect with others, with regard to this estate planning topic?
Yeah, I hope it's really brought a lot of attention to the topic, and it's made people, because what I try to do is I do try to lead with humor. That's always the way to draw people in. But then within it, I try to also educate. So, not just have a silly post or the just to be silly and get impressions and likes and all those kinds of things, to actually have a message. Because, if I just posted pure educational content that referenced the IRS code, that's going to get boring real quick. And a lot of people aren't going to be drawn in to look at it. So really my goal is to draw people in with something entertaining. And then once they're drawn in, to look at it and say, oh, I didn't know that, or, oh, I learned something new. And to really bring attention to the estate planning process. Because, the big part of my audience are financial advisors, and they're doing a lot of things. They have to cover a lot of topics for a lot of clients. And, if my audience was estate planning attorneys, they already know a lot of this stuff. But advisors are so busy. They're business building. They're meeting with clients. They have to cover a wide range of financial planning topics. Estate planning is such a critical topic. It's part of the CFP curriculum, CPWA. So it's important topics they need to know. But I get the sense that you need to put it in front of their face to kind of get them motivated and to educate. So that's really my method to do it. And the other thing is it just is so fulfilling for me. I love doing it. And so that's the other part of it. I just find it enjoyable.
Yeah. You could tell that, and it definitely stops the scroll, because you stop for the humor, you stay for the education. Right. So it's really good. So we mentioned in the intro that you joined Carson Group, and that just happened recently as their vice president of estate planning. And you talked a little bit about your journey, but specifically, what compelled you to make the move to Carson Group as opposed to many of the other corporate RIAs or even broker dealers, which I'm not a fan of, that are out there.
Yeah, I was really drawn in by the mission. And the mission that was expressed to me that really got me interested was, we want every Carson client to have an estate plan. Now, is that pie in the sky? I hope not. It may be, but it's something that really would motivate me to have a goal to drive to, right? And, just looking at leadership and meeting some of the advisors, it's just been the most fantastic choice because I'm really able to help build something that I want to make estate planning accessible and actionable for financial advisors and come up with tools and resources and educational materials to drive them towards doing that with their clients. And I think that Carson has given me a great platform to be able to do that. And I'm really excited to dig in more.
Amazing. And keep making it fun because that makes it interesting for us too. So, and it's also helpful for us to deliver that message to the families we serve. So thank you for that and welcome. So, David, we end each of our shows by asking each of our guests the same final question because we are the Midland Money Mindset. We're all about joy. And this conversation has brought me a lot of joy. And that is, what did you do today that brought you joy and put you in the right mindset for success?
I think it's the same thing that I start every day with. It's my two little kids. I have an 8-year-old and a 4-year-old. I'm dealing with very complex, morbid topics every day. To see joy truly in action is to look at your children at that age. And, I don't love K-pop demon hunters, but it gives me joy to listen to them every morning when I'm dropping them off at school. So I think it's to be able to start every day looking at my children's faces and interacting with them is always the best medicine.
Awesome. Well, enjoy every minute because it flies by. Mine are 22 and 19 now. And I was just saying to a family we served yesterday, I don't know how it happened. We were in the process of talking about they wanted to leave us a Google review. And she looked at me and said, if I write a Google review, I'm going to have to reveal how long I know you. And I said, that's interesting. I said, I remember when I was the young guy in the room. Now I'm the older guy in the room. I'm like, I don't know how that happened. So enjoy those kids, every minute of it. It's definitely an enjoyable journey being a dad. And, we're going to have all of your information in the show notes, David. But if people want to learn more about you, connect with you, learn more about your role, what's the easiest and the best place for them to do that?
Yeah, again, connect with me on LinkedIn. I'm there all the time. I'm posting just about every day. So that's a great place to connect with me. You can message me, or you can reach me by email at dhaughton@carsongroup.com.
Okay, great. Well, thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule for sharing this time with us. I really appreciate it, and enjoy the rest of your day.
This was great. Thank you.
David, thank you for sharing your wisdom and humor with us today. You've shown that estate planning isn't just about documents. It's about protecting families, preserving values, and building confidence in the future. Your insights remind us that true wealth isn't measured in dollars, but in the legacy and peace of mind we leave behind. David Haughton and all he is up to can be found across most social media platforms. All the contact information needed to find them can be found in the show notes.